And the Torah portion, we're just in this break between the end of Deuteronomy and the beginning of starting all over again, which comes after Simchat Torah, which is Simchat Torah's next weekend. So we are in this liminal period. And so I thought we could focus a little bit on Sukkot today. So I have my little plush lulav and etrog that I just used for the preschool for Shabbat that we just started doing. And one of our song leaders and I, every Friday now, are coming to the campus here and socially distanced from each other, socially distanced from all the kids. They're all sitting there in masks, which is weird, but there was something really fascinating. This is off topic, but I wanted to share it because it was really interesting. First of all, the vitality of these little kids and being exposed to that and seeing that live and in person is really important. And I realized how much I miss that. Of course, I have 3 daughters at home. There's plenty of vitality, but there's something different about these preschoolers. And what was so wonderful was that even when they were wearing masks, when they smiled, it just reminded me of how powerful our eyes are and how much you can read into people and read into emotions and into the soul. Really, I do believe there is something about us being able to look into the eyes and see something that you don't need the mouth, you don't need the facial expressions in the same way. And so to see that with these kids was a really nice, wonderful, optimistic reminder of how if we can just all focus a little bit more on the eyes. So anyway, we're going to talk about Sukkot. Let's begin with the blessing for engaging in the study of Torah. So feel free to join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who commands us to engage in the study of Torah. All right. Here we go. I'm starting. I don't know if anyone has heard about Sukkot City, which was this architectural competition that took place in New York some years ago. And I want to start by just showing you the trailer for a documentary that they made about it, just because I think it's a fascinating way of redefining and exploring the architecture and the concept of what a sukkah is supposed to be. So I'm going to share that with you, and then we're going to go through some biblical and some modern text about Sukkot, about the rules of Sukkot, and really today I want to focus on the idea of permanence and impermanence, and those themes coming together with this holiday, and how we can understand what we're supposed to take from that seemingly contradictory notion of permanence and impermanence and how they blend together in this holiday. But first, I want to show you this trailer.
When we first heard about this competition, we had no idea what a sukkah is.
We didn't know what a sukkah was.
I didn't know what a sukkah was.
I had no idea what a sukkah was.
The sukkah, it's supposed to symbolize the temporary dwellings that the Israelites dwelled in when they were leaving Egypt. More than that, a structure is supposed to make you confront the things that you have are not permanent and the ways in which you yourself are not permanent.
The sukkah is a strange kind of fabrication, and most of them are pretty boring. And the idea of rethinking what a sukkah could be seems something that'd be really fun to be part of.
The sukkah itself commemorates the 40 years of wandering during Exodus, and we said, well, perfect. This makes a perfect match between contemporary wandering and temporary homelessness and historical biblical ideas.
The roofing material was really taken as a given. We decided, instead of there being a lot of the sticks, there's just one giant log.
As I'm sure you all know, in Leviticus 23:42, I believe, we are commanded, you will dwell in booths for 7 days. Not since the collective who came together to write the Bible have so many people talked about sukkahs probably as we are about to do today.
The public would think we're looking at it formally. We're looking at these objects and we like one and we don't like one. I think it's much more about the ideals, the values, the issues that are being brought forth by the projects.
These structures realistically have to be built in a short amount of time. They're then going to be trucked into Union Square and installed within 7 hours.
It represents the currency of the time, like it or don't like it.
It's more of an offense in a way than an interesting conversation.
I mean, it's a really nice design for something else entirely, but not for a sukkah.
What made this a great competition was that it wasn't, let's find the answer, but let's start a conversation to open up how a sukkah can be developed. And I think the idea is, why should every sukkah look the same? They should all be different.
Somebody said that this is the best sukkah ever built. That's pretty good for 4,000 years of building these things.
After years with the canvas and the fiberglass, it's nice to see some new ideas.
The sukkah is one of the very few times where the Jewish liturgy and tradition actually has an architectural expression. So it's amazing nobody thought of this before.
Okay, so feel free to go and check out the movie, or you can go and find pictures of Sukkah City online. There's some amazingly creative renditions of what a sukkah can be, all based on the laws that are laid out in the Torah, but taken to a whole nother level. So again, the reason I wanted to show that to you is not only because it's nice to see something a little different, like for example, as one of the people said on there, the usual sukkah with the regular roof and the sides, like the boring kind of sukkahs that I have in my backyard, which we try to make look nice, but to take our tradition, and I think what's so essential about our tradition is this idea that you can continuously be creative with how it manifests itself in our lives and in the world, and how this is a really good example. If we take something that is ancient and we adapt it to our times and we adapt it to our creative mindset. And I think Sukkot gives us the way, not only, as they said, architecturally, but the way in which we dwell in this impermanent structure can be really special. So I want us to start delving a little bit into the text itself and to try and understand these concepts, as I mentioned before, permanence and impermanence. So we're going to begin with one of the passages from Deuteronomy. There are a few times where we have references to Sukkot in the Torah, but one of them comes from Deuteronomy 16. And I'm curious your thoughts on this one. After the ingathering, from your threshing floor in your vat, you shall hold the Feast of Booths for 7 days. You shall rejoice in your festival. With your son and your daughter, your male and female slave, the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow in your communities, you shall hold a festival for the Lord your God 7 days in the place that the Lord will choose. For the Lord your God will bless all your crops and all your undertakings, and you shall have nothing but joy. You shall have nothing but joy. Of all the holidays that we could be celebrating joy, right? You can think of Passover. If I think of the top tier holidays where I would put joy associated with them, I would say Purim at the top, followed by Passover, probably with this idea of freedom. Sukkot wouldn't necessarily be the top choice, but here in Deuteronomy, it is declared that we are commanded to rejoice. This is supposed to be Zman Simchatenu. This is the time of our joy. Of all the holidays, Sukkot is the time for us to relish in joy. Why do you think that is? Of all the holidays, why do you think our tradition would put so much emphasis on joy for this holiday where we're supposed to be outside in these booths? Any ideas? Yeah, Merle.
Isn't it supposed to be a harvest festival?
It is a harvest festival. So how do you associate that with joy?
The fact that you have a successful crop and you have food for yourself and to give away.
Great. So the idea that your crops, they have been fruitful, literally, probably, and you now have been able to gather this harvest not only for yourself but to give some away, and so the joy of reaching that point in the yearly cycle of agriculture. Okay, great, Jeff.
Am I unmuted? I don't know.
You are.
I hear you.
Okay, terrific. You have to look at this as the culmination of God's promises. If and when you don't feel that your harvest is purely by your own strength of hand and purpose, it is the culmination of the earth and its bounty with God. You have an open spiritual roof to God, and your crops and your bounty is there, and it's a joyous celebration of God being able to give you that bounty and that you share with God that bounty.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Other thoughts on this? Both of you have referenced, Merle and Jeff have both referenced harvest. I don't think most of the people, if any, on this Zoom are necessarily agricultural workers or farmers. So I'm curious, how do we take this concept of harvest and how do we translate that into the modern day so that this idea can be relevant for our lives? Because if we want to take the historic understanding of this joy of the agricultural harvest season and we want to make sure that it still remains relevant to us today, even though we don't live in that kind of society, how do we do that? How would you transfer that to a modern setting? Any ideas?
It has to do with Parnassus, as well as the ingathering of your family and friends. The truly valuable things in your life are brought into the sukkah with you to share together.
Great. Okay, so it's this idea that the gathering space that's created in the sukkah can be a source of joy because you're supposed to bring the things that really matter to you, including the stranger or guests, into a space, and to dwell and to have all of those things in one space can be a real sense of joy. Wonderful. Merle, I think I saw your hand up. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a very dear friend here who owns a farm in Scottsdale on the Indian reservation, and they give him the land. And he also has a big area down an old abandoned golf course that the city of Tempe gave him. So this morning, what he does is he helps other farmers and teaches farmers how to farm. But this morning, we all went to the meadow, which is the golf course, and they had all these homeless people come, and the harvest that he can't use every week, either in his own restaurant, which is part of the farm, or that he can't put in the boxes that we buy or whatever, we all served all these homeless people that were just coming from wherever. We have no clue how they got there, how they get there, where they come from. And then we provided bags for them to take home. A lot of them are from the Indian reservation, and others are just from that area in the city of Tempe. But it's just an amazing feeling, and he does this every single year. And during the year, especially when the pandemic started, and they had to figure out a way to work the farm that people could come and still buy every weekend, he just was finding places and taking truckloads of food to people. And this morning he said something to me about, isn't this the holiday of Sukkot? They're not Jewish. And I said, yes, why? He said, well, let's go find some trees and make it into a sukkah on the golf course, and that's where we're going to hand out the food. And I just, those of you who know how over emotional I am, I just lost it. And his wife and I are very close. He's very close to Arnie. And on my way home, I called Arnie. I said, you can't believe what Ken did today. I mean, how does he know from this? Because he's a farmer and he thinks Sukkot is an amazing holiday.
That's a great story. Great. So the joy of being able to provide for others, right? How much joy can be brought if this is a harvest festival. If we are to think about our own fruits of our labor, so to speak, because not everyone has a connection like Merle does to a farmer per se. But what does it mean for us to take the harvest, to harvest our strengths, our skills, the tools that we have in the world, and what does it mean to give those out, to share them with the world, for those to be a gift, and to do so in a way that can also gather people together, right? Because to riff off Jeff and Merle together, this idea of the ingathering of people, the ingathering of opportunity, of skill, and then to do so amongst other people is wonderful. Okay, any other thoughts on joy? This idea of joy.
What greater joy is there than to be able to sit still like a Shabbat for 7 days with your family and share the learning and share the spirit of Judaism with your family friends? You are supposed to bring in the 7 patriarchs of the Jewish history and use those daily as a different teaching, in a sense, that you bring in their wisdom of Judaism into the sukkah and share that with the people that matter in your life. So it really is kind of a magnified Shabbat. And the 8th day is a magnificent Shabbat, supposedly, as well.
Yeah.
And there's that sense of value that you create by imparting the best of Judaism, so to speak.
Great. Thank you. Yes. See, who is
Merle?
Oh,
that's Merle. No, I mean Miriam.
Miriam.
Oh, hi, Miriam. Oh, your name's not showing up, Miriam. I couldn't see you. Go ahead, Miriam. Oh, you're muted.
Unmute yourself.
She's muted.
No.
She's muted. Miriam, unmute yourself.
There you go.
There.
Oh, okay. Rabbi, it's so interesting what you said, although I had so much trouble getting onto your class this morning that I just got on 1 minute ago. But I did want to say this, that Judaism in its profound wisdom takes us from a time just 4 days later. It takes us into Sukkot. It takes us from a time that we introspect, that we look deeply within ourselves, that we try to repent and repair. I believe the two R's have to go together and not have teshuvah without tikkun. And it makes us delve into our psyche with such honesty. And now it brings us to a communal life. Because Judaism is not just looking within us, but just 4 days later, it becomes a holiday of people. When we had our Sukkah, we hardly ever had a meal without inviting someone, and that's the whole idea, is to have real ushpizin in your Sukkah. No, not just historical ones. So I just wanted to remark on how grateful I am to be part of a community, to be part of religion, although I don't like to call Judaism religion, because it's so much more than that. To be part of thinking, philosophical, that takes care of the whole. And if you can do all this, you can be happier, in quotation marks, whatever that means. And therefore, I want to express my personal gratitude. So I just want to.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, and thank you for drawing that connection between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, this idea that you can't do the deep introspective work of the internal work that we need to do alone without then connecting it to how that plays out in the real world, right? We can't just spend all of our time in a Yom Kippur mentality where we are focusing on ourselves and trying to do the work by ourselves. We don't live in that type of isolation. Even though we're mostly isolated physically even today, there's still, that's just not the way we work. And so to pair that with Sukkot, where we can start to live out and enact the work that we just did 4 days ago, and we can start to basically play with, what does this new year look like? How can we bring the joy, the work that we have done during the high holidays into a setting where we start to interact with other people, where we start to build something that maybe starts off a little impermanent like that Sukkot, but then we are supposed to be able to move the values and the experiences that we take in that sukkah for a week and then move them back into our home so that for the rest of the year, we can start to make those changes that we've worked on during these holidays into a more permanent fixture of our lives. So thank you for making that connection, Miriam. Okay, so let's keep going. So we have this idea of joy and the importance of joy and the centrality of joy. And yet we're joyous in a time where we are supposed to be dwelling in this funky structure. So let's go a little bit back to Leviticus, where we get the foundational commandment for Sukkot and what it means. So I'll just read this out loud. The Lord, obviously this is translation, I usually like to say Adonai or God. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Say to the Israelite people, on the 15th day of the 7th month, there shall be the Feast of Booths to the Lord to last 7 days. The The first day shall be a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. 7 days you shall bring offerings by fire to the Lord. On the 8th day you shall observe a sacred occasion and bring an offering by fire to the Lord. It is a solemn gathering. You shall not work at your occupations. A little further along, mark on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the yield of your land, you shall observe the festival of the Lord to last 7 days, a complete rest on the first day and a complete rest on the 8th day. It's kind of repeating what we just read above. On the first day you shall take the product of hadar trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. Again, the joy. Now, of course, lulav and etrog are brought into it. You shall observe it as a festival of the Lord for 7 days in the year. You shall observe it in the 7th month as a law for all time throughout the ages. You shall live in booths 7 days. All citizens in Israel shall live in booths, in order that future generations may know that I made the Israelite people live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt, I, the Lord your God. So Moses declared to the Israelites the set times of the Lord. Okay, so according to those last couple of verses there, what is the purpose of dwelling in these booths for 7 days? Do you want me to show it? I'll show it again. Right. You shall live in booths 7 days. Yes. All citizens, in order that future generations may know that I made the Israelite people live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. Why would God want us to remember the idea of those booths and God taking us out of Egypt? This seems like it's more along the lines of Passover than Sukkot. Merle?
Be grateful for what we have now.
Good.
When Sharon was little, she used to like to sleep outside in the sukkah. And now our granddaughters can't wait, to sleep outside in the sukkah. And we've modernized it. We lay down air mattresses in their sleeping bags, but they think it's a big, I'm not sure they get where it's going, but they also know that they're very happy to go back home or come in our house when it's, however many nights they might sleep in it, 1 or 2 nights. But they're very grateful to come back in, eat at a table, and take a shower.
Yeah.
And sleep in a bed. And I think that's part of the joy thing too, that we're teaching generations, a long time ago, 42 years ago, and now today, we're teaching them what joy should be. And the fact that they get to come back in the house and do what their normal routine, I think, is providing some kind of joy.
Yeah. To be able to go out of our comfort zone or literally out of our home into a different space makes you appreciate when you go back into that home. So that part of the joy of this holiday is that when you remove yourself from the routine that we're used to day in and day out, week after week, and you switch that around a little and shake it up, literally shake it with the lulav and etrog, but also by physically being in a different space. When you come back into your home, there's a greater appreciation. There's a great kid's story about a man who complains to his rabbi about how his house is crazy and he doesn't know how he's going to survive living with all these kids and his family. And so the rabbi tells him first to bring in a goat, then tells him to bring in a cow, and then bring in the dog, and to bring all these animals to live with him in the house. And then he finally goes back to the rabbi. I'm shortening the story, of course. Goes back to the rabbi and says, I don't understand how this is supposed to help me at all. And then the rabbi says, no, take all of those things out of your house, all the animals out of your house. And as soon as he does that, he realizes that his home is so peaceful compared to what it had been with all the animals in the house. And it's supposed to remind you that you should be grateful for what you have. And it's just a shifting of the mentality to understand how we fill the space with either our optimism, our pessimism, how we relate to one another. And Sukkot is supposed to kind of jar us out of the routine and remind us of how grateful we should be for the fact, number one, that the majority of people actually have a home, but what it means to then return to regularity. And can you return to regularity but now be a little different than you were from before? Yes, Miriam.
Oh, that's a beautiful point, but I think we need to go a little further with that. I personally, not asking others, and that is to think of the homeless. Reminds us of people don't have a sukkah. They don't have a home to go back to. But while we're so grateful, comparing the sukkah, which is actually a lovely experience for the hours that we have it, and we do have big tables in. But you think of those who have no shelter, who have nothing over their heads, and we must take time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I do some teaching with the fourth graders here at Browerman East, and one of the projects that they've been working on is talking about Sukkot and this idea of homelessness, learning about our own city and this pervasive challenge that we have here in Los Angeles of homelessness, but of course all over, and how this holiday also reminds us that while we are lucky enough to go back into our home after the week, that there are plenty of people out there who are in a constant state of impermanence, and we have a responsibility to, if we hearken back to what we just read from Leviticus, this idea that that part of this is to teach future generations. Let me just put it up one more time so you see it. You shall live in booths 7 days, all citizens, in order that future generations may know that I made the Israelite people live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I, the Lord, am your God. We were strangers. We were homeless. We have an understanding deep within our spirit and our soul and our history of what it means to not have a home. And we know that throughout Jewish history, that has been the case so many times. We have a greater responsibility. It is incumbent upon us not only to just go back into our homes after Sukkot, but to remember that there are so many other people out there who are in this constant state, and we have a responsibility to help them. So thank you, Miriam, for pointing that out. Okay, so let's keep going and look at some of the rules and this idea of impermanence a little bit more, so that we can then switch it over to this idea of permanence. Rava said, this is just to solidify what comes in Leviticus. This is from the Talmud. And Rava said, from the passage, you shall live in booths 7 days, that's referencing what we just read, the law commanded that for all 7 days you shall leave your permanent dwelling and live in a temporary dwelling. So this just solidifies this idea that you're moving from a place of permanence to an area of impermanence and a temporal place. So here we then get into just some of the laws of Sukkot. You can go and read the Mishnah if you really want to delve into this, and there's some great things. Actually, Sukkah City, which I showed you guys the trailer of at the beginning of this session, somewhere online they have a great visual representation of some of the significant laws of Sukkot. So you can go check it out. There's also all kinds of things. There's a Dr. Seuss one, which is very cute. Lots of different ways in which you can look at all of the funky rules around Sukkot. But these are a few. A sukkah which is taller than 20 cubits is invalid, so it can't be too big. It can't be, because once it becomes so big, it almost becomes a permanent structure. And remember, this has to be temporary. He who makes his sukkah under a tree is as if he made it in his house, and therefore it's not valid if you make it under a tree, because again, the tree itself is almost like it's a permanent structure, and you can't have the sukkah be permanent in any way. If one spreads a sheet on top of a sukkah on account of the hot sun, or underneath the cover of boughs on account of droppings from the branches or leaves of the bough, if he spread a sheet over a four-post or bed in a sukkah, it is invalid for dwelling or sleeping, and so for fulfilling one's obligation to dwell in the sukkah. So this is just an interesting one, the idea that you can't even add a sheet or anything that is completely covering either the sukkah itself or even covering the bed, because imagine people would literally sleep in their sukkah and still do. You can't even have a covering over the bed in the sukkah, because then it's invalid, right? So we have these a lot of specificity about what it means to be dwelling in this impermanent structure, and reminding us that over and over again, this cannot be permanent. You are temporarily here, right? And there's a power of that. There's a power in that. There's a power in the constant reminder, this is temporary. And I don't think it's supposed to be just about the temporary nature of the sukkah. Again, if we hearken back to the holidays that we just came out of a few days ago, and we recognize who shall live and who shall die, the temporary nature of our time on this earth, right? Then we also continue to have some of that theme kind of come into Sukkot with the idea of the impermanence of the structure itself, but a reminder of the impermanence of our state of being, and not just our life. It could be the impermanent nature of our economic situation, of our relationships, anything. I mean, think about, all we have to do is think about the last, 7 months of this pandemic, and the changes. Not only can you only just look at your own life and potential changes that you've undergone over these last 7 months, but all we have to do is read the paper to find out how many people have been impacted so dramatically by this pandemic, that the way 7 months ago, people could have been in one state of being in an entire different life than what they're living right now. And so we're reminded through Sukkot that, again, like all of our Jewish holidays, which are so brilliant, of taking physical reminders mixed in with theological concepts to really drive home points, right? So that it's trying to use every educational tool in its toolbox to remind us and teach us a lesson. Okay, so we have that, and now let's look at the move a little bit more towards, now we're getting into permanence. All 7 days one must make one's sukkah permanent and one's home impermanent. So now we start to get the other side. It's supposed to be impermanent and temporary, and at the same time, all 7 days one must make one's sukkah permanent and one's home impermanent. And what's one of the ways in which that happens? If one has fine utensils, one shall place them in the sukkah. If one has fine bedding, one should transfer it to the sukkah, and one should eat, drink, and walk in the sukkah. Whence is this deduced? From what the rabbis taught, you shall live in booths 7 days. This means that it shall be a regular dwelling place, right? So there are people, and you can go online and see some extremely elaborate, beautiful Sukkot that have been built with rugs and beds, TVs even, finding ways of really as if you're moving in to this space. Why would our tradition want us to make this impermanent structure a permanent structure?
Got mail.
Wow, that brings me back. AOL. You've got mail. Love it. Okay. Talk about the permanence. AOL. You would have assumed AOL would have disappeared a long time ago, and yet there is a permanence to AOL. It's still around.
I'm keeping it. It still works.
There you go. If it works, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right? That's amazing.
Exactly.
Okay, so why the permanence in this temporary structure? Yeah, Merle.
I mean, I don't want to, I hate to say so that we're comfortable in it.
Okay.
I mean,
Great.
I think TV is an extreme. I mean, I saw a picture this morning of a friend's sukkah where she had her silver candlesticks in there and china, and I'm like, somehow to me that kind of defeats the purpose. I mean, I don't know that it needs to. It's bad enough that the girls have their iPads in there. I mean, I feel like it. I feel like we want it to be a home, but I think we have to learn that it can't be. If you want it to be a permanent structure for 7 days, but I don't want it to be so glamorous that it's different than what we go back to. I may be explaining that wrong.
And why is that for you? Why wouldn't you want, if you're going to spend 7 days in a place? And by the way, you're not supposed to stay in the sukkah. In a way, since it is a time of joy. If, for example, it starts to thunderstorm, you're not supposed to stay in the sukkah and suffer, right? You're supposed to go inside. It's supposed to be
10 miles away.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a place that is full of joy and not a place of suffering. So tell me more about why you think
you have to make your joy. I think that we have the kids, in preschool, decorate the sukkah with whatever they decorated, the mishpatim and all that. They decorate the sukkah at the temple, or the kids decorate their sukkahs at home. But I think the joy is from making it different from what you live with all the time. Not that my house is so glamorous, but we have these things. But I feel like outside, where you're supposed to be watching the stars and letting the stars be over you, I think sometimes you do have to give up some of those I guess they're luxuries for, whatever you want to call them. I just feel like it needs to be more simple.
Right, and I think what you're referring to is kind of this. If we go back and harken back to the idea of the agricultural symbolism of this holiday, if we go back to this idea of wandering through the desert, there's a real sense of nature and the power of nature and the joy of nature and the importance of being connected to the land and connected to the weather. When Julia and I lived in Philadelphia, the weather wasn't as beautiful as it is here during Sukkot. I remember we were having a pizza dinner with a couple, a family in our sukkah, and it started to pour, and we had to run inside, and it was either disgustingly humid with lots of mosquitoes, or it was freezing. So we're lucky over here where we can probably get 7 days for the most part, even though it's boiling out there now. We are supposed to, again, another layer of this holiday is the joy of the world in which we live, and how important it is for us to stay connected to that world. When we are constantly indoors all the time, not exposed to the world which God created for us, we're missing a key piece of what it means to truly be alive. And this holiday, and I think what Merle is suggesting, is that if you're going to just move your entire world from inside to outside, you're missing the opportunity to shift the focus, at least for 1 week, into what it feels like to be exposed to the elements, the good and the bad that come with that. And that I think that's also supposed to be a spiritual challenge that we're facing. The positive and the challenging elements of being exposed, right? And we just went through an internal process of being exposed through Yom Kippur and this idea of teshuvah. And now we start again, as we're shifting into the real world for the rest of the year, we have to deal with what does it mean for us to try and be who we want to be in a world that is constantly changing, where we don't know what the weather is going to be like, where not everyone lives in Southern California, and their Sukkot experience can be very different on the East Coast than it can be here. So great. Any other thoughts about bringing all of the... Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Using simple words and the simplicity of the empty sukkah booth, not accoutrements in the booth, but the reason that it exists is for one purpose, it seems, at least to me. And that is adoration and appreciation of God and what you've been given. So that the stark contrast of your plush home to the emptiness of the sukkah, with all of your appreciation being to the stars and God and looking up, just as we are to look up and create a righteous relationship with God. This gives us that time of uncomplicated presence to appreciate what you have in such a way that you can share that within your family. And, the idea of the holidays being only for one purpose, and it may not be the best purpose, which is God doesn't need our praise, and yet every holiday his statements are, why don't you appreciate me? I took you out of Egypt. He wants that praise. That juxtaposition is a little bit difficult for me, but the idea of starkness, stripping away the artificial, stripping away those things that really don't represent the goals even of Yom Kippur in approaching righteousness within ourselves.
Right.
So
on Yom Kippur, we strip away all the extraneous things as well, right? We're not supposed to, put on jewelry or necessarily put perfume. Most people dress up when they go to synagogue, but we're technically not supposed to shower, not supposed to wear leather. You're supposed to strip away things. And this is, again, Jeff, where you're connecting this to this idea of let's strip away all the extraneous and focus on how we can be grateful for the most basic pieces of who we are and of our surroundings. And if we can hold on to that, think about how the world would be different if everyone was able to be grateful for the most basic things in the world. it would be a very different world than what we have right now. If we were as grateful for water as we were for other things, so thank you. Great. Okay, let's go to one more text now. Moving in, this is, and I took some of this, the kind of the structure of this lesson today from this woman, Erin Lieb Smokler, and this is a little passage that she wrote that I thought was interesting. After Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, with all of their confident declarations about who God is and who we are, about the justice of the world and the pathways to forgiveness, Sukkot comes to destabilize us. Conviction is surely a great religious value, but certainty is a grave religious danger. At best, it breeds complacence. At worst, hubristic fundamentalism and rejectionism. Certainty blinds the mind and locks the spirit. So, in a move of dizzying contrast, Sukkot provides an antidote. It comes to remind us that God cannot be fully known, that the ways of the world cannot be fully comprehended, that our own selves cannot be fully pinned down. For existence is fundamentally unpredictable and unstable, or Hevel Havalim, as Kohelet says, utterly evanescent. The universe is always changing, and we are ever in flux, sometimes birthing, sometimes dying, sometimes building, sometimes coming apart. Thoughts on that? I'll put it back up. Just
I like
know that
it.
was a lot. You like it? What do you like about it?
That I think that life is uncertain. Look at what's happened during the pandemic and how many of us have realized that there's a lot that we don't need. You know, in my case where I'm hyper and over anal, I've tried very hard to look at my OCD behavior and try and not be that way. I mean, it's never going to go away totally because it's, in me, but I just, if it doesn't get done today, it'll get done tomorrow. We're not going anywhere. But I think it's created in many places a simplicity. Yet in some people I've seen that have become so over paranoid, they've made themselves sick and they won't bend to go get help. They won't give in to go get help. So I think it can go in either way, but I think it's something that we have to see. We have to experience it. And unfortunately, this is what we're experiencing. But my my grandchildren went back to school this week, and it's a totally different environment for them. It's totally new. It's not what it was when they left in March. But they're saying it's great, so that's good. It taught them something too, whether they know it or not.
I take it a little differently, if I'm allowed to say.
Of course.
It's that
I won't throw anything at you.
Listen, I live with a world-class OCD woman, so I know who you are, so be careful. Anyway, my point was going to be that sometimes it takes what she's describing as great contrasts to create a meaningful learning experience. In other words, complacency with a routine surrounding, with routine behavior, doesn't yield growth. And these holidays and these deprivations of things are what's needed for us to look at the questions within ourselves. Not that it has to be a Yom Kippur, but this is daily. The contrasts in our life, our behaviors, the reactions that we get, the differences to what we think should happen, force us to evolve, force us to think, hopefully, of what could I do better. Sitting before the angelic court when they look at you and say, well, these were the experiences of your life, but this is what you could have done better. And that's kind of a behavior that you hope people adopt within themselves. And it's a rare quality, unfortunately.
Thank you. Yeah, for me, what stood out about this was this idea of conviction versus certainty, and that certainty is dangerous, and that Sukkot reminds us that we have to be adaptable, that built into the concept of a fulfilling Jewish life is one in which you're able to adapt. And not only have we done that historically as a Jewish people, adapted, but if we are going to take what we've worked on and we've said, I am going to be this, or I'm going to work on this, and we may fall into the trap of being certain that we're going to be able to change. And here comes this holiday that reminds us, don't get so caught up in certainty or assume that you are going to be able to do exactly what you want to do, or that the world is going to stay the way it is, which we are very clear, it's always changing. But can you be adaptable? And that this holiday is a reminder to us, you can't be so stuck in your ways, that if we look at people and we look at times in which people have been completely stuck in thinking one way, that's dangerous. And that our tradition is saying no, and that's why questions are so important. That's why debate, that's why, Jeff, I don't think you ever need to say, well, if I'm allowed to say this. No, because of course built into our entire system is debate and disagreement. And when it's done in a respectful way, it's what deepens our connection. It's the adaptability of being able to even ask questions, which is different from other traditions that kind of shy away from that and don't put that adaptability at the center of what it means. And they definitely don't necessarily have an entire holiday of an entire week that is forcing us to be reminded of the need for us to be adaptable and for us to understand and embrace change, which of course is so difficult for us as humans to do. Change is scary. Change is not easy. And yet we're reminded that that's where some of the best work happens for ourselves and for the world around us. Okay, let's go. There's one more text I want to share with you, and before we end, and this is from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who's a great rabbi, was the chief rabbi of Great Britain. Jewish faith is not a metaphysical wager, a leap into the improbable. It is the courage to see the world as it really is, without the comfort of myth or the self-pity of despair. Jewish faith is not about believing the world to be other than it is. It is not about ignoring the evil, the darkness, and the pain. It is about the courage, endurance, and the capacity to hold fast to ideals even when they are ignored by others. It is the ability to see the world for what it is and yet still believe that it could be different. It is about not giving up, not letting go. Faith is what the Song of Songs calls the love which is stronger than death. So, I'm curious if any reaction, since Sukkot is this holiday about faith, and I'd say much of what we've been talking about is faith in certain ways. So here we have this idea that faith is not a wager, it's not a leap into the improbable, that a Jewish understanding of faith is not believing in something that's unrealistic or that's not actually the way it is, but it's somehow about mixing in reality with a sense of hope of how things could be different. So any reactions to that? Do you agree with that understanding of faith? Do you disagree? Are there other ways in which you would want to connect a sense of faith to this holiday? Because even though it's easy for us to really talk about Sukkot as a time for us to gather together, to have ushpizin, guess whether physical or metaphorical, there is this theological element that we are supposed to also be thinking about during this holiday. So I want to make sure that we talk about that a little before we close. Yes, Jeff?
I think he left out two very important things, and I love the man and his philosophy. But the idea is he never mentions the courage of making the right choices or to take action based on the right and the philosophy that we believe in. So he describes the problem, but he doesn't give us a hopeful solution that we, by our choices, can make correct changes in the world and eliminate the despair, the darkness, the hatred, and all of those factors that he cites. But when you aren't offered a solution that's easy to make, it's incomplete.
Mm-hmm. And granted, this is just an excerpt, so actually, I think in general, he does a good job of addressing some of the things. And he does have a new book. It's on my to-do list to order it, called Morality. So I definitely urge all of you to go look for Jonathan Sacks, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, a new book called Morality. It's based on a series he did for the BBC, a radio series that I've listened to most of them from a couple years ago, where he interviews a lot of well-respected philosophers, intellectuals, and combined with him speaking about the same subjects with some high school students in Britain. And so he's kind of formulated a book about, especially in the world in which we're living right now, how do we define morality and how do we live a moral life? So I'm going to put it on my to-do list, but I urge you to check that out as well. Other thoughts about this idea of faith, or how Sukkot can offer us insights into either our own understanding of faith or us as a group? Yes, Merle.
Doesn't God expect us to attempt to find the solutions ourselves? I mean, that you know,
as opposed to who doing it for us.
We don't know who or what God is. We've been taught that God is there. We read that God is there. But I'm thinking, in addition to what Jeff said, that I think maybe God, whoever God is, with what we had wandering through the desert and everything else, that now we're at a point where we're a community and we need to work as a community to find our solutions.
Great.
I mean,
yes.
That could be way off, but you know.
No, I don't think it's way off at all. And Cynthia says the importance of resiliency, of being able to adjust to circumstances, whether permanent or impermanent, and not just adjust, but to live well and grow from all the myriad things that come and go in our lives. Great. Thank you, Cynthia, for that. Wonderful. Any other thoughts about faith, or about maybe even this year what you hope Sukkot represents? And I don't know if everyone here, my assumption is not everyone builds a sukkah every year, or is going to, especially given the circumstances of this year, be able to dwell in one. But even if we are not going to have the physical sukkah for ourselves, what do you want Sukkot to represent for you this year? Given what we've talked about impermanence and permanence, about faith, about the various ways in which our tradition has explained the significance of this holiday. I'm curious if anyone wants to share. Maybe, I know Merle and Jeff always have great insights, but I also do want to give other PM, Miriam as well, who spoke. But in addition to them, who I know will have some thoughts, I'd love if anyone else wants to share as well, to share what can Sukkot represent for you this year, or one thing that you want to hold on to for this upcoming week.
For me, it's sort of this idea that of spirituality. When we do read the text a lot, sometimes we forget that the spiritual nature could create a stronger bond, and that faith can grow through that vibration of being outside and connecting with the earth and being one with nature. I think the takeaway with your family could be that, let's get outside, let's be under the stars, and let's feel connected to God in a different way than by being in a synagogue and reading text. So I think that's a really big way that your faith can become stronger, is through that connection.
Great. And what you're talking about also, I think, is there's one thing to study something, there's another thing to live it, right? And for you to study about something or read the text, as you said, can help you, and maybe can help you guide you along the way, but it's when you actually get out there and do it that you can truly live it, and your spirituality can almost come alive in a more substantial way. Great. Thank you, Michael.
There's a great passage and story that kind of sums up human living for me in a way. And when we talk about what is our responsibility, it's to grow in righteousness towards God. And the best story to show that we have the capability is Jacob's ladder. There are times in our life when the steps and choices we make give us greater righteousness, so to speak. And yet there are other times in our life where we descend a rung or two on that ladder towards righteousness. But it's a system where there is no failure, there is no ultimate success. There's just the effort needed to choose to climb that ladder towards righteousness. And the disheartening element that life can be for people is to realize they have another opportunity at any time to make the right decision to improve their lot, improve their righteousness, improve their thoughtfulness, whatever words you want to take in the positive vein of human behavior as we know it, so that it's never going to be a straight line. And Sukkah allows you to stop in a bare and naked environment and look at where you are. You call in the righteous of the seven to help you think through it, and then maybe you move on into the mundane again.
Thank you, Jeff. Anyone else?
Well, by the way, I already broke one of my New Year's resolutions.
This quickly, huh?
I said I wouldn't talk so much and I would listen more. So there you go.
All
You're
right.
okay,
Well, something to
Jeff.
work on. Well, I hope all of you, whether you dwell physically in a sukkah or you can at least spiritually immerse yourself in a Sukkot mentality, where you can be exposed to the impermanence of our world, of our own experiences in this world, and yet find some comfort in that impermanence and realize that there's a lot to be grateful for, that we live in a world that is truly incredible, that exposure to that world brings more joy to our life than isolating ourselves purely in our homes or in our own bubbles. So I wish you all the best. Chag Sameach. Have a meaningful Sukkot, and of course, Shabbat Shalom as well this evening. So thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you.
And look forward to a
Thanks
future
very
one
much.
together.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
I've got to get a T-shirt, Rabbi, that says narcissism is not all that bad.
Nice.
Like,
I want to see that next time
like Merle is a world-class OCD. I'm a world-class narcissist. So
Wait,
there you go.
they found my keys, so
Oh, mazel. That's great.
the bot has arrived.
Hallelujah.
There you go.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody. Good Shabbos.
Rabbi, you said wonderful things. Thank you.
Miriam, you look
Yes.
lovelier every day.
Oh my God. I first see my picture now for the first time. Scary. Are you scared?
To me, you're beautiful. Always
Thank you.
have been from the
Well,
first day
listen.
we met.
If you live in Nevada and I live in Los Angeles, you know, I could look good. Don't.
You're
And now,
wonderful.
Jeff, I want to wish you a year of very good health.
Thank you.
Renewed health, if that's your position, to you and your whole mishpacha. And
Thank
a
you.
year of only sympathies.
I hope we're here next year to say the same things to each other and share throughout the year.
I hope so, dear. And you are a profound.
Thank you. Be well.
Happy
Happiness,
well, all of you.
health, all those things that will bring us joy.
All those good. Did you have any trouble getting on today?
No,
No trouble. Wow.
no. I do it
Okay,
on the
dear.
computer too, so.
Have a good year. You have what?
I just, it's one of the things that when I go to the temple website, it comes up almost immediately for me.
Yeah, it did for me. WPT, no problem. I went on it, like I always do. It says join the Zoom, Rabbi Nickerson. And sure enough, as soon as I went on, it said, you cannot reach this.
You know who I miss and haven't seen in a while? Is Talia. Is she okay?
Good. She was on just the other day.
Oh, she
Might not
okay.
have been able to make it.
Well, give her my best as well. So I haven't seen her in a while.
You take care, Jeff.
All right, sweetheart.
And
Bye-bye.
Don, thank you for leaving us on, Don Levy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.